I did work a little bit with some of the linen today. Our church leadership actually in the last few days has allowed us to meet in our homes, and so we served the sacrament, which is sort of like the what do they call it in the Catholic Church? The Eucharist? Something like the Eucharist. We do the sacrament, and we were able to do that in my home today. My husband has the priesthood, and so we were able to do that. My mom came over. She's actually been being very careful about leaving the house due to the current health situation that's happening. And so that was a lovely thing, but I did realize that I kind of needed some white, a white tablecloth and a white napkin to do that service with. And so I had a beautiful white tablecloth that fits my little coffee table perfectly, but I was not able to find at all anywhere a white handkerchief or kind of a napkin cloth. And so I used a little bit of the linen for my shift to do that with. And so I've gotten to work with it a little bit. I have realized a couple of things I learned while ironing linen. It seems, and maybe you guys that do this more could correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me if I ironed the linen and then let it cool and then ironed it again, that it held the pressing a lot more than if I tried to just keep ironing it and keep ironing it and keep ironing it. So tip one that I've learned. So this year we've kind of been focusing on what are we learning from things rather than having like a to-do list, things to do. For myself, the to-do list actually includes learning something. And what am I learning from the experiences that I'm having? So actually this whole 12-month clothing challenge is about that. It's about what can I learn. How can I learn some new skill? How can I incorporate things that I'm learning into the things that I'm doing? And what am I getting out of it in the long run? So, lesson number one, iron your linen twice. Let it cool well between each ironing. Like, yeah, I would make a good pass at it and then let it cool down and then come back and do it again, and that would actually help it hold the pressing better. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why am I doing what I'm doing. I've talked about this a lot actually. I posted something on Facebook recently about they found a very old garment from, I believe it was Norway, but that they tried to do a reconstruction, but they actually couldn't afford to do a reconstruction of that garment because it would have taken so much money to do it, to pay someone to prepare the fabric, to weave the cloth, to do all that from the sheep to the actual wool garment, that it would cost so much that they couldn't afford to do it. And so clothes anciently were a lot more expensive than we give them credit for. And being a sheep farmer and doing my own sheep shearing and doing that processing myself before makes me really realize how much time and effort and energy it takes to do those things from scratch, from the very beginning to the end. And that's actually the thing that I'm very interested in. How do you do something from the very basic sticks and stones or things out in nature or animals or whatever's out there? How do you create some new garment from scratch? We have this thing in my family where we have spirit animals that our parents kind of choose for us, and we get an impression about that when our children are little, at least in my family we have, about what their nature is sort of like, and the spirit animal sort of represents their nature. So that's not anything about a Native American tradition at all, that's just a tradition within our family. But I asked my mother one time if I had a spirit animal, and she pondered that for a while, and she decided that my spirit animal was a mouse. And I was actually a little bit insulted because I just didn't get it. And I asked her why, and she said, because you're always trying to get to the root of things. You're trying to go back to the beginning. You're trying to get to the bottom of things. And that actually is really true. And so I've accepted the mouse as my spirit animal. But anyway, so the thing that I'm trying to get to the beginning of with this project, with this 12-month clothing project, is more than just clothing, more than just trying to create something by hand. I have done that before, but I tend not to spend the time and energy and effort it takes to actually do that. If it's just a piece of clothing, that's not enough for me. If it's just something that I'm throwing on my body to wear out in the world, that's not enough of an impulse for me to spend the time and energy it needs to be done. And so so when I started thinking about historical kinds of sewing, I realized that it needed to be, number one, it needed to mean something more, and number two, it needed to relate to something bigger and more important. So for me, when I shifted from the Peter Pan collar shirt, which is a useful piece of clothing and would be worth the time and effort to make it, there just wasn't enough meaning in that for me to make me motivated to actually do it. And so I've shifted my focus, and I talked about this in my previous video, towards a garment called an Irish Lena, a shift, basically, a piece of undergarment that was worn in Ireland in medieval times, was worn throughout history, actually, and has quite an interesting history, and I'll talk about them more a little bit later when we get going on that project more. But that the reason Irish Lena and not some other shift. So I wanted to start from the inside out because I want to do a whole costume outfit, a whole outfit. And if I start with the undergarments, which I don't know a lot about, and so that's one thing as I get to learn more about how to create our undergarments and make them, but also coming from the inside out, coming from the basics, coming from the back at the beginning of the roots again. Where do you begin? You begin with the underlayers. And so, but why Irish Lena? And I wanted to let you know that one of the things that I've been working on over the last probably 10 or 15 years is researching some of my Irish ancestors. And I was studying specifically a particular family a couple of years ago. I had actually done some genealogy about 10 or 15 years ago, working on my grandmother's family. My maternal grandmother, all the women, basically all the way back for a long, long way. So I was trying to find where that line actually came into the United States and when and what the situation was. And we went to Minnesota, my mom and I went, to do some research on our Irish ancestors and find out where exactly they came from in Ireland, because as you know, if you're a genealogist, it's very difficult to do genealogy in Ireland if you don't know the exact location where people came from. And so the goal for that trip to Minnesota was to try to find out where that line came from in Ireland. And I wasn't able to find exactly the person that I was looking for, but I did find some other people in the family who are from County Roscommon, and then they have townlands. They have little tiny pieces of property that are also named, and if you can know what townland your ancestors are from, the records are much more clear. And so they're from the townland of Kilglass, which is in County Roscommon. And so I've been feeling very close. We had some miraculous experiences about that genealogical trip that we took to Minnesota. Amazing things happened. But I really wanted to do something in honor of that Irish heritage and find out more about Irish history. And so while I was doing that genealogy, I was reading some more statistical societal studies of what Ireland was like in the 1840s and 50s, which was when my ancestors came, that particular family came to the U.S., and what was happening in Ireland at the time. And so I know a lot about the Irish potato famine. I know a lot about what social upheaval was happening in Ireland at the time. I know something about how the Irish landownership was being passed down from the parents to the children, how England was influencing a lot of the things that were going on in Ireland, how they actually paid people to come to the U.S. because they believed that Ireland was overpopulated, which it probably was. And but the English really wanted to kind of get rid of the Irish and not have them in Ireland anymore. And so I'm not sure exactly what the situation was specifically for my people, but we are hoping to go to Ireland in the near future and find out more about that, the history there. But because of that history, now I'm interested in things like what they wore. And I'm interested in the fact that, for example, the Lena, the Irish Lena shirt, was something that was banned in England. There were sumptuary laws, actually, where the King of England said, hey, you Irish people, don't be wearing shirts with more than so much fabric in them, and don't be wearing saffron yellow shirts, because saffron yellow shirts was the traditional shirt of Ireland, and it became a symbol of the independence of Ireland from England. And so they were trying to keep insurrection from happening, and they passed these sumptuary laws trying to control how the fabric was being used. And of course, Ireland has had for many, many, many years a grand history of linen, of producing linen and growing it, and also wool as well. And so I want to learn as much as I can by actually handling and working with those materials as much as I can about what it might have been like to be that person back in the 1840s moving away. And so the Irish Lane is older than the 1840s, and I doubt that people were wearing it much. I don't know for sure, but I doubt that people were wearing it much in the 1840s. Some of the things that I've been reading were that they were so poor that most of their clothes were rags, that anyone that was not landed gentry in that period of time was having a difficult time finding clothing or having enough resources to actually make more. And there is some confusion about whether that's the case or not, but anyway, the Irish Lena. But at the moment, the challenge is linen, and the challenge is to try to find a way to make an Irish Lena that works. And so it was a blessing today to be able to spend some time with the linen, hemming the napkin that we were using for our little church service that we held in my house today. And I'm actually really grateful for this impulse that I have right now to go back to the beginning, because I don't feel fear about the future as many people are feeling right now. I know how to do a lot of things from scratch, and I do know how to make bread from wheat, and I do know how to do a lot of things from scratch. And because I've had this impulse my whole life to go back to the beginning and learn how to do stuff, that's benefiting me now. And hopefully others too. So hopefully there are some other folks out there who are learning from those of us who have spent all our lives doing the things from scratch, that we can help teach those who are more tied into the modern world, and we'll find it a really big challenge to be able to survive through difficult times when the stores are empty and they don't have a lot of food storage in their house. So very grateful for my religion and my background in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, guidance on having food storage, on preparing for emergencies, on having water and food stored. I had, up until very recently, a whole lot of toilet paper in my basement. And it's been a little rough financially lately because of surgeries that my husband's had to have. And we had actually gotten down to our last 6-pack of toilet paper, but we had a 6-pack of toilet paper in our basement when all this toilet paper fights started breaking out in Walmart. So we have since found some more, and we are not hoarding, but we definitely have a good couple of months worth of food in the basement, and it's a little different than the food we normally eat, but it will keep us alive. So grateful for those teachings, grateful for the teachings of preparing. So take heart, and if you are here and you're in that position where you don't know what to do next, think about that. Think about going back to the beginning. How did people live 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 500 years ago? What did they eat? What in the neighborhood where you were at? What did they spend their time doing? Clothing, like I say, hand making clothing from scratch is a very time-intensive activity, but when you have time and you're self-quarantined in your house, that's a good time maybe to learn some new skills, and because it's actually very gratifying and teaches you a lot about yourself, and it gives you a sense of being able to accomplish things and not be afraid. And so I hope that all of you can take heart and look up and take this as an opportunity to learn some things that you maybe didn't know about before. So most of you that are on my channel already do this stuff, and most of you are already well indoctrinated into doing things from scratch. But maybe we'll get some new people, and I hope so, because it'd be great to spend some time with some new folks. So I'm gonna video this because I feel like I'm gonna want documentary evidence of trying to do this. So I started with my linen handkerchief I talked about in my last video, but I was unhappy about how even I could get the hems, especially in the corners and things like that. And so I'm doing a much more elaborate and time-consuming kind of pulled thread sort of hem on it that will take into account the natural tendency for linen to stretch in particular directions. And how I'm doing that is, if you can take a look really closely here, I'm pulling out a thread that's about 1 inch from the edge of my I actually pulled a thread along the edge in each direction, and then I measured 1 inch up, and now I'm pulling a thread 1 inch in this direction. And I've already done this one, so you can kind of see where the thread was pulled. It's a little bit wrinkly because I just pulled it, but here you can see that if I pull one thread, there's a tiny little line, especially with the light behind it. So I mounted it up on my ironing board so that I could kind of see with the light coming through where that thread was at. Now, it looks to me like it's taking about 50 times longer to do the first thread of each pull, because I'm actually pulling 4 individual threads out of this line. So I'll pull the first one, pull the second one, pull the third one, pull the fourth one, but the first line is always the most tricky, partly because it bunches up here at the end, and then any slubbiness or anything of the fibers that are going on that particular thread, they don't really have any place to move to. So so they're just kind of getting bunched up in a train fashion. But with some patience and 3 tools, a pair of extremely sharp thread scissors, a pair of tweezers to hold on to the thread with, and a needle to pick the threads out with, it's actually happening. And I'd kind of like to do this on the Lena, actually. I know that that's going to be just a gigantic job of pulling all these threads in the seam for the Lena, but I also am interested in drawn thread embroidery, and so that may be a good reason to learn how to do this better. As you can see, pulled out quite a bit of thread on the floor, but love my orange carpet. It's awesome. Anyhow, just wanted to document a little bit this path of treating linen as its own thing, and it really is it seems to me anyway, the crossways grain of the thread And the fact that you can pull these threads out and the remaining pockets of complete fabric are very neat and straight. And that quality of linen is not the same as with wool, and it is one of the most beautiful things about linen. So I'm excited to learn something new and try something different, and I will document a little more of the hemming as we go. So I ended up coming home and just kind of plopping down and eating my dinner and basically, you know, vegging out for a little bit. So I'm sitting here in my living room watching Bernadette Banner on YouTube on the TV where I can actually see what she's doing, and doing some hand sewing on my linen handkerchief little cloth thing for the sacrament meetings that I was talking about. So it is definitely taking a heck of a lot more time than it was before, when I was just kind of randomly sewing things together, but it also looks so much nicer. So much nicer. So I just wanted to give you a little heads up and show you what I'm doing.
Part one, in which I
Easily turn your phone into an action camera. So here I'm doing the first stitch, and basically what I'm doing is taking the first 5 threads that I've pulled the warp threads out, and I've got 5 weft threads that I'm separating out here with the needle, and I take a stitch and then I go back into the hole that it came from and then take a little tiny pinch of the hem. And so there's 2 steps. There's the first step again, 5 threads, and what it does is it pulls those and then take the hem stitch. It pulls the warp threads into a little like a wedge shape or a V shape, and if you do those 2 steps, then you get this really beautiful, neatly done edging. So there's the beautiful, neat edge. And of course, this is the first time I've ever done this, so this looks amazing to me for the first time. There's the edge, and then I'll show you the corner, because you have to do something specific on the corner. I'm doing a little tiny whip stitch down here, holding those little corner edges together. That's the beautiful hem stitch edged on my linen cloth. Very excited about how it's turning out, and I'd really like to do it for my Irish Lena project that's coming up. But I'm going to finish this first. I'm going to spend some time sewing on it and enjoy my little afternoon at home with the TV and YouTube videos and hem stitching my project. We'll talk to you later.